when we look from the research design, research sample design, there are broadly two types of surveys. One is, suppose if I'm going to conduct a survey in first year PG or first year MCOM class. Okay, I'm going to conduct a survey. I want to see out of 30 students, how many of you will prefer the so-called, as you say, sports, or maybe how many of you would like to actively engage in sports activities. I want to find out that. So my sample size is 30. Maximum students in that class is 30. And for me, there is no point in going with, I have just 30 students in my hand. So there is no point in me making a selection from that. When I'm going to conduct a survey, it will be possible for me to conduct among each one of you, because the size is just 30. So my population is first MCOM class, okay? And if I'm going to collect the data from all the members, all the participants of that particular population, then that survey is what we call as census survey. So in the census survey, every unit in the population is examined to come to or to arrive at a conclusion. Such type of sampling is what we call as census survey. Okay, so every unit in the population is selected for a study. In fact, if you ask me which is best, either you select a sample or you can study the whole thing and come to a conclusion. The better would be if I can study the whole thing and then come to a conclusion, because that will be very much near to the actual condition. That's the ideal condition. Okay. But we were talking about a population of 30. But imagine if I'm going to conduct a study about the corporate, the example which I'm going to do in the class, the corporate governance practices among companies in Kerala. I know the number is very huge. Right. I know the number is very huge, and for me to conduct such a study, taking the entire units in the population is pretty difficult. We might be having limitation with respect. Maybe if I'm an industrial group, or if I'm going with a government body, and my purpose is to cover maximum units in my survey, maybe that is possible for me. With the support of the different agencies, I can conduct a study among maybe 80 to 90% of the companies in Kerala. But if I'm talking about as an individual researcher, I'm conducting a study in Kerala, and we all know that there is limitation for money and time. So in that case, the methodology adopted by the researcher would be sample survey. The researcher may not be going to the entire units in the population. Instead, a representative sample, I underline, a representative sample is selected to conduct the survey. Such studies where you're not covering the entire population for arriving at conclusion. Instead, you're selecting a representative from the population. That is called as a sample survey. I'm just taking a sample, a representative sample from the population. So as I know, based on the method of collection of data, okay, based on the method of collection of data, sampling can be the census survey and sample survey. In census survey, every unit in the population is studied to arrive at some conclusion. Whereas in sample survey, a representative unit is studied in order to arrive at conclusion, because taking up the entire units in the population might be a little difficult because of the limitation in resources, maybe time, maybe money, right? So there are two types, census survey and sample survey. Now the next thing what we are going to discuss is two basic laws that are applicable when we are going with sampling. Okay, the first one is law of statistical regularity. And the second one is law of inertia of large numbers. Law of inertia of large numbers I had been discussing all through before, no, as all through our lessons till now. Because if I am saying that my sample, based on the sample, I have come to a conclusion. Based on the experiments I've conducted, I've come to a conclusion that this is the all these are the basic characteristics of a particular community, or all these are the basic features of some aspect. Then if it is to be accepted by the population, if it is to be accepted by the eminent academicians, I should be in a position to produce that with enough sample size. Because I have to say that, okay, upon 10,000, I've taken 10% of it. I've conducted an elaborate study, and then I've come to a conclusion. Maybe that is representative. People would be accepting because my sample size is large enough to be representative of the population. So that's the basic idea behind law of inertia of large numbers. My sample size should be large enough to represent the population. As I can increase my sample size, the authenticity of my result also will increase. Of course, there are many other factors. The sample selected by me should be actually representative of the actual condition. Suppose if I'm biased, and I pick samples which may not represent the actual position, then all these are just a theory. But in case of a scientifically conducted research, if I have to come to a conclusion which may be acceptable to the academic community, in such a case, I have to go with law of inertia of large numbers. Large numbers are considered to be reflective of the actual condition. That large number, how much is it? The sample size, it depends upon the number of units in the population. Suppose if my population is huge, I'm going to cover different nations across the globe. My sample size should be large enough to represent that. Otherwise, no one will be able to accept the findings which are made by conducting in very minimal units, right? So that is law of inertia of large numbers. Then law of statistical regularity says that I should be in a position to capture the features, to capture the actual scenario which are prevailing in my population. See, that is where we go with different types of sampling methods like cluster sampling, or as you say, stratified sampling. Because when I find that my population is heterogeneity or differences across the units in my population is huge, in such a case, I have to go with some meaningful categorization of the entire population into different groups, different homogeneous group. Maybe no two groups are homogeneous, but within the members or the participants within the group are homogeneous, more or less homogeneous. Likewise, so that I can pick different units from different groups, so that I get an ideal representation of the actual condition. In the nutshell of that is, the researcher should be able to capture the primary features of population when you're going to conduct the study. The randomization of sample selection, replication of sample selection. All these are some of the characteristics which need to be applied in order to ensure law of statistical regularity. At random, every unit in the population has equal chance of being selected as a sample. So there is no personal bias involved. Then I should be in a position to replicate the sampling or sample selection, or and also I might be able to repeat the experiments to ensure that the results are same as what I did in my, or the results are same as I had concluded in my previous findings. So this is actually law of statistical regularity, which helps the researcher to capture the actual characteristics of the population for taking up different implications or coming to different conclusions based on a particular research objective, maybe with respect to the problem under study. So these are the two basic principles that are applicable especially in social science research, because in social science research, we are basically looking into some phenomenon which may be related to the human behavior. So things are a little more complex because I myself can exhibit different behavior in different conditions. So external environment is also having an impact on the human behavior. So all these factors need to be considered. So accordingly, I have to select a big sample, or I have to go with a large sample size when I'm coming to no formulation of a theory or the generalization of a concept in all these cases, because otherwise the acceptability of that will be very less among the academic community. Right. Now, these are the basic principles of sampling. Now, the next thing is sampling design. Sampling design is actually it's a plan of action for obtaining the required sample for my study. Suppose if I'm going with a census study, if I'm going to study the entire units in the population, there is no point in me designing it, because I'm going to, maybe I can think about the methods which I will be using to collect my data. But there is no point in designing the different stages in collection of sample. But when I'm talking about collection of sample from a population, it will be important for me to have a plan, because I may not be collecting my sample, the entire thing in a single extension, or in maybe during a certain period. Maybe it is separated across different time period, or I take it to different units in the population, or different groups in the population during different times. So for me, in order to have a systematic procedure in collection of sample, in order to ensure that I go with the right methods and methodology, I should have a sampling design. So it is, in a nutshell, it is actually a plan for obtaining sample from the designated population. That is what we mean by a sampling design. And definitely, a sampling design should identify the population, the designated population. It should have it should completely or correctly define the units, the sampling units, and it also should have a sampling frame, the list of items to be included, to be mandatorily included in my selection procedure. And then I will go with determining the sampling size. I can use statistical methods for determining my sample size, or maybe I can just take a representative ratio from the total population, right? Or I can look into what the other studies have done with respect to this particular area. Based on that, their input, I can also, the researcher can also decide on how do I design my sample size. And then, of course, we have to go with the design should say specifically about different sampling techniques which will be used by the researcher for collection of data. And finally, how the researcher is going to execute the entire process. In fact, I will just share with you my experience of submitting a proposal and going for an interview. During the interview, the interviewers, they normally concentrate on two areas. One is the problem identification. They will, again and again, they will ask questions with respect to whether the researcher is very sure with the problem under study, whether the researcher is confident about the usefulness of the research. That is one part. The second part is about how the researcher is going to collect the sample, how the researcher is going to decide the population, how the researcher is going to decide the list of units to be included in the sampling frame. That part is extremely important, because maybe I have a good topic under consideration, I have a good area for study, but if I've gone with a wrong sampling design and plan, maybe I will not be able to arrive at the right kind of solution to that problem, or right kind of implications, or right kind of conclusion to that existing problem. So that is why this stage is very important with respect to how we are able to justify the units and also the list of samples which we are including in our population. So that's why we say that a sampling design, a plan should be comprehensive enough to ensure the result of the study. It should be, as you say, it should involve all the elements which can lead to a good conclusion, or which can lead to a solution to the existing problem under study. Right. Now, we are going to discuss the steps that needs to be followed when we are conducting a collection, when we are going with collection of sample for our study. So first is definitely we have to define the problem. See, I have put an example for me to just discuss with, when I'm discussing one stage, I will go with the example which I'm quoting for my today's class. That is, the example is, I want to understand the corporate governance practices of public sector companies. Okay, I want to go with understanding the corporate governance practices which are being undertaken by public sector companies in Kerala. Right? So definitely the population is the public sector companies. I have defined the unit sample, unit, the state. I want it to be within the state. And then now I will be defining my population as all the public sector companies within Kerala state. And what I have to understand here is the population here is very huge, right? So for me, I will have to go with defining it in such a way that I can be able to conduct the study within the limited time. So maybe I take public sector companies, which maybe industry-wise I can categorize as a unit. I want to take public sector corporate governance practices of public sector banks, or I might be looking into public sector companies, government companies who are into manufacturing. So I'll be looking into manufacturing companies, or likewise, or I want to look into the public sector companies who are going with manufacturing of cement, because there are a lot of pollution that is being created by such companies. So I will be selecting a unit based on the purpose of my study. So in this particular study, maybe I'm looking into the manufacturing companies, public sector manufacturing companies in the state of Kerala. Right. So I will have the list of all the companies that are operating within Kerala. Okay, under manufacturing sector. And then I thought the list is very huge. So I have got the sample frame. The sample frame is I have to include all the companies, the manufacturing companies, public government companies, which are operating in Kerala. Then from that, what I did is, I thought the list is very huge. So what I did is, I took one particular sector. Okay, I took the cement manufacturing companies. I narrowed down to cement manufacturing companies alone, where those are coming under the public sector. So that became handy for me. Because you remember earlier, I wanted to study the corporate governance practices of public sector company, right? Then I defined it to be in Kerala. Then what I did is, I found the list to be very huge. So what I did is, I took manufacturing sector. From there, I again included only the manufacturing sector, the manufacturing companies who are going with cement manufacturing. So in my list, I have the list of cement manufacturing government companies in Kerala. Right. So I'm looking into that aspect. Or maybe, for me, if I find that the list is very huge, then I will have to go with another categorization, which I'm looking from the angle of maybe the year of inception. I can categorize that into little more homogeneous groups, like those companies which had been operating in Kerala for 10 years. Okay, so I will put 10 or more in one group. Then I might categorize that as 5 to 10, those who are having an operational history of 5 to 10 years, and then less than 5 years. So I put them like that. Maybe those who have been in Kerala market for more than 10 years, one group. From that, I might go with the selection of 10% of the companies in that group. Then I look into 5 to 10 years. From that, I might go with 5% of the companies. Okay, then the new companies I might go with again 3 to 4%. So I have a representation of, or I have categorized the companies based on the year of inception. It depends on, okay, it depends on my purpose. Suppose if I want to understand whether there is any difference in the corporate governance practices of companies based on their year of inception, I can do a categorization like this. Or if I want to like make a categorization as large scale, small scale, and medium scale, that's possible for me. I will formulate the homogeneous groups like that. One group would be like large scale companies, another would be medium scale, another one be small scale units. Or suppose if I want to look into exclusively into the medium and small scale industries within Kerala, I can do the categorization like that. So that is actually the sampling frame. And from that, I will decide my sampling size. I have to see, a researcher cannot just say that, I decided that my sample size can be 10%. I've decided that I will take 30 companies. If I'm saying that the sample size can be 30 companies, I have to give that with valid evidence. What is it which made me decide that my sample size would be 30? I have to say that. I have to ensure that there is some kind of validity to my decision for sticking on to the sample size is 30 or 40 or 50. I have to give some justification other than the personal justification of the researcher. Either I have to say that upon the total 100 companies, I've decided that I'm going with 30%. Or maybe I have to say that this is actually a representation which I have calculated by using some statistical formula. You have a statistical formula for computing the sample size. We can say like that. So there should be some kind of justification which the researcher is going to give for the decision regarding the sample size. And then the next thing is sampling technique. What are the methods or what are the techniques that will be followed by the researcher for collecting the sample? Maybe the researcher can go with different types of techniques. One is direct interview with the respective personnel in charge within the company. Another one is looking into the annual report. So there can be primary as well as secondary techniques that can be used for collection of sample. And the research can use different, as we say, different data collection tools depending on the respondent, the nature of the respondents, the kind of the study, the type of result expectation, all these. And of course, then the last stage is execution. All these you are deciding, and then execution of the sampling process. So finally, in this particular study, what I will be doing is, imagine, I'm not saying that's the right one, but maybe I've selected, looking into the sample list, I've selected 30 companies and decided that I'm going to use two methods. One is interview method, another one is distribution of questionnaire. So personal interview as well as distribution of questionnaire to so for senior staff, for senior officers, I will go with an interview method, and for the other staff who are coming under the category of supervisor, or maybe who are coming under the category of workers, I will use some questionnaire. I will distribute questionnaire. So these are the two methods which I have decided, and I can also say that how am I going to conduct the interview? Is it a scheduled interview, or is it an extempore interview based on a discussion? How am I going to do that? And I can also say the type of secondary data that will be used for my study. Maybe I can say that I will look into the annual reports of these companies, and I will also look into their stock market performance, if it is a listed company. Yes, that's another way of categorization. I take only listed companies. I have a justification. I go with listed companies because of availability of data. I can say like that. So these are the aspects which we would be looking into when we are designing a sampling plan, as well as when we are executing it. So this was the topic under discussion, where we said that initially we are going to design the population. Maybe first I took all the companies, public sector companies, then maybe because that was a huge list, I divided the population. I brought down the population to corporate governance practices of public sector companies which are engaged in cement manufacturing. So that was my population. And maybe that is quoted as a limitation for my study. I will say that I have looked only into cement manufacturing, corporate governance practices of cement manufacturing companies, and maybe corporate governance practices of banking company, public sector banking company, or public sector IT companies, or maybe when I'm looking at public sector small scale industries. All these can be different. So that can be the scope for future researchers who are planning to look into the corporate governance practices of public sector companies. The scope for continuing with this research, because me as a researcher has covered the companies which are engaged in cement manufacturing, and I've said that these are the types of activities, corporate governance practices being followed by cement manufacturing companies in Kerala. Maybe we can make a comparative study of corporate governance practices of manufacturing companies with service industry. We can make a comparative study also. So it all depends upon how are you going to identify the population, how are you going to identify the problem. Of course, that's the first thing. And then once you have a problem in hand, the next important thing is we have to identify the population for us to set.